Today, we're doing something a little bit different. We're still going to have two formal presentations, but this is your time and opportunity. What a wonderful treat for you to be able to get some of those questions answered right here, live with our Emory experts. So today with us, we have Dr. Monica Parker. She's going to talk about the 10 early warning signs of Alzheimer's. Then we're going to hear from Margot, and I'm not even going to butcher your last name. So she's going to tell us how to correctly pronounce her last name when she comes on. She's going to talk about food and cognition and what should we be eating right now. We probably know what we should eat, but she's going to give us the why. Right now, we've been at home for over 3 months, and where you've adapted or changed some of your lifestyle habits or built some new ones, this is going to be a great time to take notes and adapt and adopt some of these strategies that you hear today. Then Dr. Goldstein, she is our neuropsychologist. So if this is your first time joining us, we try to pack a lot of information in under an hour. But today, Dr. I'm gonna mute.
I thought you said a video.
And John, if you will mute. Hi, Dr. Goldstein. She's just joining us. And so we're still just waiting for Dr. Parker. She's going to open us up after John. And if she's not on, we'll just switch some things up. But we've already received around 15 questions already. And so after our two presentations and our exercise demonstration, if you're joining us, remember, do the exercise at your own risk, okay? Get a sturdy chair, okay? This is your time to go and run and get that sturdy chair. Well, what we want to emphasize every week is what's good for your heart is good for your brain. And so we have John on every week to tell us and give us just some practical things that we can do. So we have been inactive or we're not getting the physical activity that we need. He's giving some things that you do at home. So again, thank you all for joining us. We're so happy that you're here. And we're hoping to wrap up a little bit around 3:05. Finally, if you have a chance and there's a burning question, you can send that in the chat. And after we complete our questions that have already been sent in, we will address as many questions as we can in the chat. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Our disclaimer is, if you have a really technical question and we can't get to it, we always say your first line of defense is to reach out to your primary healthcare provider or your specialist. We're just trying to keep you informed and engaged during this pandemic. We're still in a pandemic. Even though things are opening up and we're active and we're seeing the numbers spike, we still want to be a resource for you. We want to keep you encouraged and also say happy 4th. It's almost the 4th of July. We're smack dab in the middle of summer. So thank you for tuning in. And with that, John, you go right ahead.
Hey, I'm back. Today we're gonna do Black Lives. I just need y'all to follow my arms and my legs and let's have fun. Give me the green light. Give me the white light. Here we go. Let's get that up right. I'm ready to go right now. Watch my feet. Let's go. There we go. Let's go. Go. Can I get that over body? Let's go. There we go. Come on now. Watch it. Watch it cross the leash. Let's go. Hey. 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 We get that blood flowing. We get no There we go. Hey, 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 come on. Okay now. Watch it, watch it. There you go. Come on, keep it going. We can go hip, hamstring, and upper body. What? Can I get that white flag? There you go. Come on. Come on. Come on. Good job. Imagine that upper body, please. Here we go now. I need that upper body. Elbows up. Press it. Come on.
I'm the son of a third generation farmer.
There you go. Go.
I've been married 10 years to the farmer's daughter.
Right. Right.
I'm a hard-working combine driver. Oh, my power. 25 miles an hour. On my international highway.
There we go. Come on.
3 miles cars running on their horns.
Come on.
Bombing on down here's a cord.
Press down now. Let's go. Get to the show.
Like a big parade. Late work, road rage, church, shouting up same words with the lead the bird.
Let's go. Come on.
Baby, on the state paper.
Come on.
Blacktop up to my pay.
Get him up. Get him up. Let's go.
Use me time to do my job. This here ain't been no bumper crowd. If you don't like the way I'm driving,
Let's go.
yes, otherwise the time be nice.
Come on.
But you're talking to me that way. Some son of a farmer.
Grab that tractor right now. Give me that white flag.
I'm proud to say, oh my God, you're hard-working combine driver.
Come on. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. Good job. I hope y'all really got something out of today. Remember, cardio is life. If your vitals are now going up because you're being stagnant and eating a lot of sodium and a lot of sugar, get the water in and just walk around your apartment, your house, or the hallways. Get a little active. I know we're going through a lot mentally and physically, but stay on it and be responsible, not only for yourself, but for others. I want to thank you and enjoy your day and see you later. Bye.
Thank you, John.
Yes,
I hope everyone was moving, you're energized, your heart rate is up, and you're ready to take some notes and learn today. So as we mentioned, Dr. Monica Parker is going to open us up with talking about the 10 early signs of Alzheimer's disease. So Dr. Parker, while I pull your slides up, you want to introduce your topic?
Okay, in previous talks, we have spoken a lot about what are some of the symptoms of dementia. And as we discussed before, one of the first things that most people discuss is memory loss. But as we pointed out, when you start to have problems with dementia, it's something more than memory. It's like being able to plan activities, plan what you're going to do, execution of those things, that can be a symptom that you may be having a problem. Aside from memory difficulties, there are other things that we're looking at. We call them soft signs of dementia. As a primary care doctor, one of the things that we may pay attention to with some of our older patients is whether or not somebody remembers that they've had a doctor's appointment. It may be, okay, they can remember all of their appointments, whether they write them down or not, or they forget an appointment. Are you remembering to take your medicines the way you're supposed to? So memory loss that disrupts daily life, things that you need to do, forgetting important dates or events, asking the same questions or repeating stories over and over. And again, needing to use other things to help you remind things or forget things. I do know that a lot of the patients that present to me with problems of maybe early dementia are the fact that people forget major things. They forget to pay their phone bill. They forget to pay their electricity bill, and their electricity or their utilities are disconnected for non-payment of the bill. So things like that are when people run into crisis. It's like when you don't remember the things that you should remember automatically, or the things that you're forgetting to do now. It's not just remembering somebody's name. It's something important, like I need to get this bill paid. It's I need to get to a doctor's appointment. I need to refill a prescription. Those are things that make it like more likely that somebody is having difficulty with the way they're processing information. Maybe it's a behavior. Next slide, please. Challenges in planning or solving problems. A lot of these things that we're going over are things that are coming directly from the Alzheimer's Association website, and you can look at those things, but these are the things that I've been talking about. Planning or solving problems, that's executive function. People may experience changes in their abilities to follow a plan, work with numbers, pay bills. Again, keep things organized. Next, please. One of the things, difficulty completing familiar tasks. A couple of weeks ago, Dr. Hepburn went through how you might be able to get a driving evaluation. People who drive, people who've been driving for 50 or 60 years, all of a sudden forget how to operate their motor vehicle. But more importantly, they may even get lost in someplace that's very familiar to them. I used to practice in rural Georgia, where there's one traffic light in the city of Social Circle. And the person who lived in Social Circle her entire life all of a sudden got lost. That's unusual in a place like Social Circle because there's now more, but there was at the time just one traffic light and one turn to make so that you could get to the post office. Well, in small towns, getting lost is something that's very unusual. So people with Alzheimer's or some other kind of dementia may forget to do things that are purely routine and very familiar. Next. Confusion with time or place. I'm talking to you. Today is Tuesday, June 30th, 2020. Somebody who has a problem with their memory will say, well, I don't know what day of the week it is. Maybe it's Monday, maybe it's Tuesday, but it's definitely 2015, and that would be wrong, okay? So those are things, confusion with time or place. Is this something that happens all the time? Is this something that happens routinely? People generally with Alzheimer's type dementia will forget something that they did yesterday, but remember something they did 30 or 40 years ago. Yeah, I remember when Dad and me, we went to the picnic out on the lake, and you haven't been out on a picnic on a lake for some time, but they can't remember that their daughter got married yesterday. Something simple like that. Confusion with time or place or even events. That's a lot of times when we do dementia testing, We read you a story and you try to see whether you can remember what happens. Okay, number 5. Trouble understanding visual images and spatial relationships. This is what we call visual spatial. Are you looking at something and interpreting correctly what it is? Sometimes people don't see things clearly. Now, is that Alzheimer's? No. A lot of older people have problems with cataracts. They may have problems with macular degeneration. And those are different problems as versus somebody who has a problem with how they interpret what they are looking at. I may be looking at a stuffed animal or a teddy bear and interpret that as a real person. That would be a problem, okay? It may also mean that they're delirious, but that would be a problem. A lot of people who have difficulty with their vision don't necessarily have dementia. They may have cataracts. They may have macular degeneration. There are specific visual problems that are unique to the older adults. And that's why it's important in terms of your wellness to make sure that you have an annual visual exam. Keep going, please. New problems with words in speaking or writing. I often say, are you using the right word? Are you calling it the right thing? I have a cell phone in my hand, but maybe I don't call it a cell phone. I don't recognize it as a cell phone. Maybe I think it's something to comb my hair with. Okay, maybe instead of putting food in a pan, we put food in a bag and think that it's going to be okay. So we'll call the wrong thing, the right thing, the wrong thing. And sometimes people will start talking and they forget where they are in terms of what they were saying or who they were speaking to, and they don't really remember how to do things. And a lot of us forget that in the middle of the talk. It's like, oh, I didn't mean to say that, but you catch yourself and you go back to where you were. People with dementia frequently can't do that. Keep going. Misplacing things and losing the ability to retrace them. I can't find my keys. I can't find my purse, and that daughter of yours was in my house, so she took my purse and she took my keys. A lot of times people who are starting to have difficulty with their brains generally accuse other people. And I think we've talked about this before. Rather than say they lost them, somebody had to come in the house and steal them. Or I spent all the money out of my account, but no, I didn't do that. My daughter must have done that. And so they might not like you for that. So a lot of people with memory dysfunction will misplace things and then not be able to find them for whatever reason. And then they may even get to the point where they accuse other people of taking those things from them. Next, please. Poor judgment. One of the things that I did see with a lot of my patients who have cognitive difficulties is they have developed compulsive habits. They overinvest in their stamp collection. They enter sweepstakes. They buy things. They fill up their houses with things that they don't need. Buying baby clothes, excessive amounts of baby clothes. So using poor judgment when it comes to managing funds and purchasing things. Keep going. Maybe they even don't dress or groom appropriately. A lot of people who start to have problems with the way their brain functions are more comfortable to be at home where things are more familiar. So rather than go out where they're not sure where things are or how things operate, they prefer to stay home. They won't go to church anymore. They may not go to bridge club. They may not just do social things. They may prefer their company of being home. So they don't go out. They don't engage as much and they stay home. Why? Because they're more secure and comfortable being there. Next. These are behaviors for things to look at. Somebody asked, is this information available online? Well, the Alzheimer's Association has lots of tools that you can use to look at different signs and symptoms of dementia, as does the Alzheimer's Foundation of America, and I think that those websites are a part of this presentation. A lot of people with cognitive disorders will experience changes in their personality. Some people become very moody, very irritable and disruptive, and other people become very calm. One of the things that we do talk about is apathy, which is a withdrawal and kind of like a winding down, kind of like a forced isolation. That's one of the symptoms that we're starting to become aware of. Early depression, which untreated depression can masquerade as a type of dementia. So a lot of social withdrawal and apathy is kind of like an early soft sign of cognitive dysfunction. Next, I think that's it. But again, as I said, these 10 signs have been well discussed on the Alzheimer's Association page. But it's always important when you go to see your relative and you're observing things that seem out of the ordinary for you to discuss these things in concert with your relative's primary care provider, who can do tests and make referrals to subspecialists like neurologists, cardiologists, orthopedists to try to evaluate and assess things. It's always important for you to discuss what you're observing with the doctor who treats your relative so that that person can help in the evaluation of what may go on. Everything you see is not always Alzheimer's or even dementia. It may be a medication interaction or a disease process that needs to be better controlled. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Parker. So there's been a flurry of more questions coming in. We are going to go to our next presentation, and then we will try to address all of those questions, okay? And I'm trying to get this box off the screen. Okay, Margot, are you, there you go, all right.
Hi,
Hello.
thank you. Would you like me to go ahead, or do you want me
Yes,
to?
go ahead and just tell me when to advance your slide.
Sure, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Margot Witteveen. I am a dietitian, and I am with the Cognitive Empowerment Program. And I'm really glad, thank you, Cornelia, for inviting me to come and speak with you all today. This is something I love to talk about. So we're gonna just briefly discuss what is the mind diet and how foods affect our brain, and we're gonna talk about some brain healthy foods. Next slide, please. So I don't know how many of you have heard of the mind diet. Typically when I speak to some of our members that are participating in the CEP, a lot of times they haven't. So I always want to say it is a combination of actually two diets. It's the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet, or MIND. It contains components of these two. And the DASH diet is a dietary approaches to stop hypertension. And I'll go into detail in the next few slides. Next slide, please. So we've all are familiar with the Mediterranean diet, and I'd love to show this picture because sometimes we talk about what the Mediterranean diet is, but I want you to see it visually. And the Mediterranean diet includes fatty fish, healthy fats, sometimes wine is included. You can see there are some walnuts up there in the far left corner. So it's lots of healthy fats that are going to be good for your brain. And of course, as the name indicates, it's the diet that is followed by most of the populations that live along the Mediterranean in Western Europe. Next slide. So here are some of the components of the Mediterranean diet. Healthy fats, as I just mentioned, olive oil, nuts and seeds, fatty fish, salmon, sardines, anchovies. It is limited in red meat. Red wine is fine in moderate consumption. I always say if you are going to include red wine in your diet, please run this by your primary care physician, because I don't know if alcohol can sometimes interact with certain medications. Healthy grains, vegetables and fruits. It's low in processed foods and low in added sugars. Next diet, or excuse me, next slide. I've got diet on the brain. Okay, so I'm going to quickly shift gears and now talk about the DASH diet. And this stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And as you can see in this slide, it's including more fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, less processed foods. This is a typical diet that is given to individuals with high blood pressure. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about what is in the DASH diet. As I said a second ago, it is a diet that is used to lower blood pressure. Foods that are naturally low in sodium, it's less processed foods, increase in fruits and vegetables, increase in fiber, which is really a challenge for everyone, all Americans. It's hard to get fiber in our diet, and it's also low in sodium, which is also a challenge. If you are eating generally anything from a box, it's typically going to be higher in sodium than what is recommended per day. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about what the main differences of the DASH diet and what's the Mediterranean diet, and then we're going to get into eventually what the MIND diet is. But really the Mediterranean diet is a lifestyle. It is an increase in healthy fats. It's a community meals. It is lower in stress. They typically have a more healthy relationship with stress. They participate in things that they enjoy, and they focus on adequate sleep. And I always say that yes, nutrition is very important and vital to our overall well-being, but it's really all of these things put together that helps make a healthy individual, if you will. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we are going to move into what's the hungry brain. I want to talk a little bit why I was talking about these two diets and why they are important for our brain. So I don't know if you're aware, but the brain is the hungriest organ in the body. It actually uses up to 20% of our daily calories, and its preferred source of fuel is glucose or sugar, and it has a high metabolism and it uses up nutrients quickly. It loves antioxidants, and those antioxidants come in the form of plants, vitamin E, C, and A, or flavonoids, and it's very sensitive to oxidative stress. Next slide. The rest of our brain is made up of fat and water. Fats or lipids, these are essential structure component of our neurons. They help facilitate blood flow. And DHA is the most metabolically active fat. And that is actually the fat that you will find in salmon, which is why we recommend fatty fish such as salmon, anchovies, or sardines. And the brain needs healthy fats to survive. And it's just, you know, I always say we need to release the need for fat-free foods. I think the 90s did us in with the fat-free, you know, the 100-calorie and fat-free snack packs. We really need to start embracing healthy fats and realizing that they're actually an integral part of our diet. And not only that, but they're great for our brains. Next slide. So we've been talking a little bit about the Mediterranean diet and the DASH diet. So what I want you now to have in mind is the MIND diet. And I'm just going to read this quote. The MIND diet is a healthy, evidence-based way to eat that is designed to help prevent Alzheimer's disease and delay cognitive decline. It selects the most brain-healthy foods, and basically they took one smart diet from two healthy ones. Next slide. So let's talk about what the MIND diet components are. There's an emphasis on leafy greens, and actually they recommend you have these daily. You want to have nuts most days of the week, beans every other day. Olive oil is the main. And I encourage you all, I know sometimes it can be difficult to try to incorporate olive oil every day into if you're not used to it. One thing that we did in the CEP program is this is of course pre-COVID, we did an olive oil taste test, and it was fantastic, and our members loved to understand the uses of olive oil and how it's you can really easily incorporate it into your diet. The MIND diet also limits foods that aren't good for brain health. There's no calorie counting, which I think for some people really relieves stress, because calorie counting can cause a lot of stress and just you know, discomfort when you're talking about dealing with the diet. There's no long list of foods to avoid. The eating pattern is based on food and not specific nutrients. It's not overly restrictive, and it doesn't require you to buy special foods or supplements, and it truly is everyday eating. So to wrap it up, these are the 10 basic brain foods. Whole leafy greens, other vegetables, nuts, beans, and berries, poultry, fish, and wine. And I always like to say wine is optional, and olive oil. If you can try to incorporate these 10 foods, you know, throughout the incorporate into your diet, you're going to be on the way to giving your brain foods that it needs and foods that can actually help with cognition. And so I encourage you to try to incorporate these, or I challenge you to try to incorporate these into your diet over the next week, and then hopefully you can continue these on. That concludes the part of my presentation, and thank you again for allowing me to contribute.
Thank you, Margot. So that concludes just the sort of our formal formal presentations. Now I see a lot of Q&A in the chat. So now we're going to transition and have all of our panelists come on and give us insight and share with us. A lot of you all have already sent in some amazing questions. And again, we will try to address as many as we can in the next 30 minutes. Okay. All right. So let's see what, all right. So this question, anybody want to take a stab at it? It says, how does having more education can it predict if you will have better memory later in life? Dr. Goldstein, you're our neuropsychologist.
I knew you were going to ask me, so I actually prepared a few notes on this, but really what education is a marker for is more cognitive stimulation. And we talked about in one of the sessions we had a couple of weeks ago, the importance of cognitive stimulation. Basically, higher education means that you have developed some stronger brain connections, maybe neuroplasticity of the brain, better connections with the hippocampus, meaning the memory structure in the brain. So there's a lot of evidence showing that in early life, higher education is protective against developing Alzheimer's disease. But the really important point is that even if you don't have high education, for whatever reason, you left school early to support your family, or you did something else, it's never too late to start protecting your brain. And we talked about some of the cognitively stimulating things you could do, like taking continuing education courses, learning new languages, doing things that are interesting and just constantly challenge you to do things. One other thing about education is that it really is a marker for something else potentially. People with higher education also potentially are higher SES, which means maybe they had better lifestyle diets, maybe they exercised more, maybe they had opportunities when they were younger. So again, though, these things, if we take them now, Margot talked about the importance of diet, exercise is critical, never too late to start. So the point is, even if you don't have high education, you can still do things to protect your memory and your risk for Alzheimer's disease.
Excellent.
Yeah,
Okay.
let me just jump in with one thing, and it's a little difficult to make this suggestion in a time of COVID, but a friend of mine once said one of the best things you can do is to meet and have a conversation with a stranger every day.
Oh, interesting.
You know, you think you can't fall back on any patterns or any kind of established modes of communication. You have to be fully engaged, and so if you can find a way to do that these days, that's one possibility.
Another question for you, Ken, is that mastering the art of verbal prompts, verbal responses for caregivers with people with dementia. Do you have any advice?
Well, I think the way I would approach it is to, if this is a person whom you've known for a long time, and I think in most cases that's the thing, start from where you would have started in ordinary times, and then work backwards. So if the way you usually prompt draws a kind of a blank stare or doesn't get what you're waiting for, then understand you've got to begin to scale back. So you have to scale back perhaps in the complexity of the instruction or prompt itself. So instead of saying, go into the kitchen, get me some milk, come out here, bring a couple of cups with you, and we'll have tea, which is 4 different things. Start with one thing and see if that works. It may be that even that kind of simple prompt with words doesn't work. Then you have to go to more visual and tactile kinds of prompting. So realize that there's a continuum from very complex language down to just using touch, and be experimental. You know, see what works. And by the way, see what works today, because you may need to change it a little bit tomorrow.
Okay. So Dr. Parker, can you explain the relationship between dementia and alcoholism?
Yes, one of these, chronic alcoholism is somebody who has consumed large amounts of alcohol for a long period of time. The recommendation for good health is women shouldn't have more than 6 ounces of alcohol. That's wine, hard liquor, whatever you want to call it. 2 ounces of hard liquor, but let's just say one of those a day. For men, the limit is 2. But there are many people who consume lots more alcohol than that. And if, for example, good drink to use might be beer, okay? People who drink a 6-pack of beer every day might be accused of being alcoholic. And over time, if that's how much beer you consume on that regular basis, you're going to start to have problems not only with how your brain functions, but metabolic functions are going to be abnormal as well. So chronic alcoholism is the fact that you consume excessive amounts of alcohol over a long period of time. And over time, that alcohol has kind of like poisoned and ruined some of your brain cells and some of your other bodily functions. So that is the connection. There are other studies that go along with it. So somebody who's had, one of my patients' favorite drinks was, she would say, I only had 3 fingers of bourbon every night for dinner, but she didn't have just 3 fingers of bourbon every night in a tumbler. That's what she called it. 3 fingers of bourbon in a tumbler every night. She had what amounted to, a bottle every night. And she was starting to have trouble with the way she walked, and she was getting confused. And she went to the emergency room one night because she fell and she broke her hip. And when they did all of her blood chemistries, they recognized that she was drunk, but she had abnormal liver function tests that would have gone along with her having developed alcoholic changes. So her family decided that they wouldn't enable her anymore and help her buy alcohol because she lived in an assisted living facility, and they thought that that would help. But she'd already had advanced significant changes associated with her alcoholism, such that she lived in an assisted living facility. But when she broke her hip, she could no longer live in the assisted living facility either because she had mobility difficulties. She fell because she was drunk. So chronic alcoholic encephalopathy is a real thing. Let's just say that you've killed off your brain cells and it's not reversible like any other kind of dementing disorder.
Excellent. Margot, someone asked red wine or white wine?
Yes, that's a great question, and I should have clarified that. Preferably red wine because of the concentration of flavonoids. And again, as we're talking about alcohol here, I want to emphasize that it's just a minimal. In fact, it's about 4 ounces for women and 6 ounces, and this is according to the Mind Diet. And I want to emphasize that this does need to be discussed with your primary care physician, because I want to make sure it does not interfere with any of your other medications if you are taking anything that is for prescription base. But red wine would be the preferred one.
Okay, Dr. Goldstein, what memory exercises can I do? What's neuroprotective? What can I do that I have control over?
All right, so a couple of things. One is I'm a big believer in calendars and keeping notes with you. One of the things that I teach at Emory that's been really successful, and I just happen to have a copy on my desk, is the use of a notebook calendar system where you write down appointments, things you have to do, things you want to remember, conversations you've had with people, and you keep this with you at all time. It takes the burden off of trying to keep something in your head, which gets harder as we get older, and puts it all out there in external ways. So I'm a firm believer in writing things down, not keeping sticky notes all over the place, and having, a note here, a note on your desk, a note on your refrigerator, but putting everything in one place and carrying it with you. The other thing I think I mentioned in my talk a couple of weeks ago was the fact that there are some programs online that are challenging and kind of fun to play. And one of the ones that we use in our cognitive empowerment program is called Brain HQ or POSIT, P-O-S-I-T Science. This consists of a bunch of different programs that start off kind of easy. They are, for example, there's attentional measures to help you with your memory, attention. They start off kind of easy and then they get harder and harder as you get better at them. There is some efficacy behind them, controversial, but some studies have used them and found that they are beneficial to people. So those are really the two things that I would recommend.
Okay, now Dr. Hepburn, one question. My wife has early onset. She talks all day and sometimes while sleeping. How do you stop that? Should we increase meds? And sometimes she can be combative. What is the solution?
Lord. There's probably no real easy answer to that one at all. If the talking all day is a new behavior, that's sort of interesting. But if it's simply a continuation of her being a person who's verbal, I think you're going to have to expect that that's going to continue. And so maybe you have to do things where you yourself can shield yourself from that chatter. I don't, generally speaking, and Dr. Parker's a much better expert here, advocate using medication under almost any circumstances, because the side effects are generally worse than what you can accomplish, and I'm not sure you can accomplish anything. I'd say you might have to think about changing your bed habits and finding sleeping in different rooms. If that's keeping you awake, that's something that you could do. There's another part to the question, Cornelia, but if this is an old behavior, it's probably likely to continue and maybe to continue. So maybe if you can find things that enable her to focus, even if she's talking while she's doing it, you can let her be doing something and talking at it while you're taking a break from that. I really appreciate. Yeah, Monica, what was you saying?
Another point to that, and Dr. Hepburn is right, I don't favor medications. And what is important is habit and patterns of behavior. People who are given activities to do, kept physically active and maybe as cognitively engaged as you can during the day are helpful. Establishing routines so that people know when to get up, when to go to bed, establishing a scheduled list of routines. Dr. Goldstein said, write down your appointments. When you live in a household with somebody who has a dementing disorder, it's important for you to develop a daily schedule for them. And in that daily schedule, you make sure that you include a lot of physical activity such that they are able to go to sleep. You have a bedtime ritual, a bedtime routine that you stick to. People who have routines generally go to sleep and sleep well. Now, in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, somebody may be given a medication to sedate them. So in nursing homes and in personal care homes, people who have a tendency to look for some kind of, we call them chemical restraints, but those are bad things to give people because they generally make them more confused and they can result in some toxicities that actually put people in a medical delirium, which is a medical emergency, and you've created more problems than you've solved. People who are under a lot of sedation don't eat, don't drink, and subsequently become dehydrated and disoriented, and that results in a hospitalization, which drives up the cost for managing them. And more importantly, if somebody's on a lot of mood-altering medications, this makes it difficult for them to be placed in a nursing facility, an actual skilled nursing facility, because those are medications that we try to avoid in older adults and certainly adults with dementia. So the short answer to the question is establishing a schedule list, a schedule or routine schedule for somebody with dementia that includes physical activity that kind of helps them. It's sun is out, it's time for me to exercise, time for me to do this. It's time for me to go to bed. I brush my teeth, I take my bath at bedtime. But the worst thing that you can do is try to increase I won't say well, they are antipsychotic meds, things like Risperdal, things like Ambien. Ambien is for people under the age of 60 who are in good health and don't have a problem. And those aren't medications that you're supposed to be on chronically. So the short answer is no antipsychotic medications. You don't need to increase those medications. Those just
Yeah.
make things worse for older adults.
Let me just stay with this one because this is a very complex question. It's a great question. And I think when I went back and looked at it, the transition from ordinary life to living with a person who is in the early stages of a dementing illness, living in the early stages of a dementing illness, is a very complicated one for the caregiver, because the caregiver has to begin to give up a lot of habits too, and a lot of expectations, and absorb very rapidly the information that can be gained about what's happening as a result of the illness. And so combativeness, for example, and I want to be very careful not to say this is the caregiver's responsibility or fault, but combativeness may be a sign of just genuine confusion, not understanding what's being asked, not understanding what's being said. No, you can't do that. Powers of reasoning, thought, judgment are all being eroded by this emerging illness. And so the caregiver, in some sense, has to be doubly cautious about the way of saying, I think it's often useful to take an I statement, a framework. I really need your help here. I need you to help me do this. I need you to come with me to do this. I need your help, rather than you need to do this, because they may understand, the person may better understand, I'm being drawn into something that where I'm still there and useful, rather than having to make some judgment calls.
Okay, so more questions rolling in. My mother has memory issues. I'm her primary caretaker. Should we travel this week with the COVID spikes? And how do I remind her to stop touching things without nagging her?
I think we're sheltering up here in northern Wisconsin. I've got a 4-year-old granddaughter I just took to a park, and I thought, how do I keep her from licking things, practically speaking? It's a terrible time. So you can, I think, you're the risk manager, and you can make judgments. Are you going to be able to watch your mom sufficiently carefully to know if she's touched things? If she has, can you quickly sanitize? Can you ask her to be in situations where other people are using masks, and she will be willing to do that? So you kind of have to, you're the risk manager. You have to judge, can I impose, if you will, the protective measures that are going to be necessary, or is it just going to be a real struggle? So it's a balance between doing something that might be pleasurable, that might involve some inconvenience, or doing something that's just going to be, a constant battle.
The other thing that I would suggest for people venturing out or traveling, depending upon how you travel, is please look at the CDC website for COVID-19. It gives you pointers and tips about how you can travel and what you should carry. The basics, as Dr. Hepburn pointed out, yes, you need to wear a mask, carry your own tissues, carry your own hand sanitizer and other items. Put gloves on her, but more importantly, start securing and looking at where you're going. If you're going to a restaurant, what kinds of COVID precautions, safety precautions have they put in the restaurant? What are the restrictions? What is, wherever it is you're going, how are they protecting you in that environment? And as Dr. Hepburn said, use your own judgment, be practical about things, but keep in mind, if you are taking somebody who's geriatric, and a lot of us are, out into the general public, you are putting them at risk. And so we need to take special precautions. And if the person that you're traveling with can't follow those precautions, then you need to probably rethink taking them out in that environment. But please look at the CDC website on COVID-19. There are fantastic tips for people traveling, recommendations, always the basics, the face mask, the hand sanitizer, the tissues, and all those sorts of things, and certainly limiting your exposure to large groups of people. But look at that CDC COVID website. There are lots of tips for traveling, what things you should consider. But one of the main things to consider and certainly talk about is how you're going to manage where you're going.
Okay, so this question, I'm going to try to give you the abbreviated version, but my dad has dementia. He's 78 years old. He's with the VA, but I've been on the Zoom calls and I've heard about the battery of tests you've mentioned. He hasn't had any of those. Should he have these specific tests? And how do I know what kind of dementia he has?
I think I can answer that one. The VA system, there is a system there, and they have special protocols for all kinds of things. And I think that you need to go with your father to whoever his or her primary care doctor is in the VA system. They do have neuropsychologists, they do have neurologists, but they won't routinely order those things if they're not aware that there is a problem. And in the VA, you have to work through your primary care team. If you're geriatric, you might be on the bronze team. And if you want a neurologic referral, they have to make it for you. But they do neuropsych testing, and they do all the imaging that we do here. But it's a process that you have to go through, and you have to work through that process with your father's primary care doctor. They won't just, you can't just go in there and ask for something. They have a system for doing that.
Okay, general question, is there a test I can take at home to evaluate my memory? I'm 63 years old.
I would like to just answer that there are some things on the online that purport to measure your memory and your cognitive functioning. I would avoid them very much. They're not necessarily valid, or they could tell you that nothing's wrong when there is something, or the opposite. I think the best way to really evaluate your memory is to see a specialist, to get tested, and to then be referred, if the doctor feels it's warranted, to somebody such as a neuropsychologist who could really perform a thorough evaluation using norms, tests that are normed, and that can really put it all together and give you some feedback on how you're doing. But I would not take these quick tests on the computer.
Perfect. And so, Margot, I just want to go back to, I know over time we've mentioned red wine and people sort of light up like, yes, but what other sources, if they do not consume alcohol, we don't want them to start, we don't want to double their intake, where can they get flavonoids, what is it called? What is it?
Oh, yes. The flavonoids are the rich colors that you see, and the phytonutrients are some of the rich colors that you see in berries. So honestly, what I would recommend is doubling up on those blueberries and blackberries. I recommend a quarter cup every day in your diet if you can. And right now, blueberries and strawberries, I think they might be coming out of season right now, but you can add them into your smoothie. You can throw them on a salad. You can eat them on their own. And it's perfectly fine to buy them frozen, but I would just, don't worry about the wine, just move on to some berries, and you're gonna get that deep, deep concentration of the phytonutrients and the flavonoids that we were talking about.
You said
I hope that clears that up. I'm sorry, Dr. Parker?
You said blueberries, but can you count cherries, like red cherries?
Yeah, you sure can.
Because
Yep.
they're in season now.
They are in season, absolutely. You sure can. Cherries, anything that has that deep, deep red color, that almost that's gonna stain your fingers, that's what you're looking for.
Cranberries, black cherries.
Yep,
Beet.
yep, beets, exactly.
Okay, Ken, my mother loves to entertain and attend parties. What do we tell her when she asks, where's the party? And she wants to plan a party.
Well, one thing you could do, I think, is actually plan a party, a Zoom party. I would engage that thought. I actually would do that. I think I would engage the thought and say, well, you know, whom would you want to invite, or what would the party be for, to see if there's anything that actually taps simply into a memory, which could then lead to some reminiscence. And that in itself would become the activity. If there is a genuine and sort of continuous thought about wanting to see somebody who might be available by Zoom, then I would try to set that up, or you know, FaceTime or Zoom or something like that. I would try to set that up. If it's actually someone nearby, and this goes back to the COVID material, if it's someone nearby about whom you feel quite confident, you might actually schedule an in-home visit or go out and have a driveway party with the person. But I think engaging the mom in what she seemed to have liked, but being sociable, and trying to either get it to go back to memory or to design something where she can actually interact with somebody, might be, in both cases, might work well.
Okay, 2 questions about having a predisposition for certain types of dementia. One question is Lewy body dementia, is that hereditary? And then the other question is, do I have early onset if I have had some experiences with forgetting things and being forgetful? I'm 75 years old.
I think,
With a family history.
okay, if you're 75 years old with a family history, we certainly would, you probably need to have some other kind of evaluation. You can certainly participate in some of our memory studies, but if you have a cognitive problem, you probably need to have that evaluated. One of the things that I do want to say about Lewy body dementia is, in any one individual, some of the pathologic findings, like Lewy bodies, for example, are found in people who may or may not have been diagnosed with Lewy bodies. You can have Lewy bodies in people who have Alzheimer's type dementia. Different pathologies that you don't just generally see until somebody dies or they've been thoroughly evaluated can exist in any one individual. So we generally think of Alzheimer's disease as having a genetic underpinning. Vascular dementia does not necessarily have a genetic underpinning. A lot of people have cardiovascular disease that puts them at risk for strokes and all those risk factors that are associated with it. Those can be familial, but it doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to have vascular dementia. A lot of these things, these neurodegenerative processes, are still being investigated and evaluated, and the mechanisms for each of them may be different, but they haven't been well studied and as well characterized as I think people would like them to be. And that's why we conduct research. You know, we do MRIs now. 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you had to die before we gave you a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. But now that we do cerebral spinal fluid analysis, now we do PET scans, we can tell that somebody living has Alzheimer's or doesn't. But it's a lot of testing that's involved. But several different disease processes do have genetic underpinnings. You have to undergo testing to figure some of that out. If you're just like, oh, well, my mother had some kind of dementia at 80, she died 10 years ago. We don't know what kind of dementia she really had unless you've had an autopsy result that told you. So that's why we do the research. That's why we are encouraging all of you who are able and healthy to participate, because we need to understand how these different diseases develop and what's similar, what's dissimilar, and we're still working on it.
Well, let me just jump in with a couple of things too. I totally agree with what Dr. Parker is saying. I think it is the case that we need to remember that only 10%, actually less than 10% of the population over 65 has dementing disorder. And so not to be demented is what's normal in aging. There are other factors that produce lapses in memory. Distraction and depression in particular is one of those. And especially during COVID, with social isolation and all of the sheltering in place, a lot of people are developing a kind of a moderate, mild depression. And so if there's a persistent worry that I'm no longer able to do the complicated things I used to be able to do well, then really go and get somebody to look at you. If it's, I can't remember the name of that second cousin that I remember liking in high school, I'm speaking personally, then probably not a problem.
Okay, so we are at the top of the hour. We have a handful of questions still remaining, but we want to just close out with research. We are a research center. Everyone, our panelists have been a part of research, and so I want them to take 1 minute each just to talk about their research. We get questions, people sort of think, oh, research, and now you're gonna, do something invasive. Well, research just runs the gamut. So if you could just share briefly as we close out, and if there's other remaining questions, we will address those next week. We hope you will join us next week. And then tomorrow we are closing out the final part of our 3-part series to address men's health and health disparities. But research is, there's a spectrum of research. And so Dr. Hepburn, if you could share your insight briefly, then Dr. Goldstein, Dr. Parker, and then Margot, any final tips?
I think you said it very well, that research runs a gamut, and it's either very minimally invasive, where that means we ask you a bunch of questions, some of which might be kind of personal and a little embarrassing, to taking a variety of bodily fluids and imaging you in a variety of ways. And each one of these enables us to gain new knowledge that may help understand how Alzheimer's starts, understand how to treat it, understand how to help people be more effective as caregivers, understand how to improve the quality of life of people living with dementia, or even people, or those who have a mild cognitive impairment. So we're in the business of trying to find new ways to help. We can't do this without research participants. And so please be aware of what kinds of things we have going, and if something looks interesting and attractive and you're willing, we're really grateful.
Dr. Goldstein.
Yeah, so personally, I've been very interested in health disparities. We know that African Americans, for example, are at 2 or 3 times the risk for Alzheimer's compared to other groups. So a lot of my work has focused on trying to understand why that is, what early life experiences, hypertension, cardiovascular diseases, just try to figure out what causes that. And if we know what the mechanisms are, we can then work on prevention. I've also been very interested in trying to find devices that can detect Alzheimer's even before the person starts to show changes. We call that preclinical disease. So just trying to figure out whether there are certain assessment tools that may be able to pick up someone who has Alzheimer's yet is not showing any symptoms, because the whole field has moved towards early detection. The earlier we can detect the disease, the more chances we have of doing something about it. So, Dr. Parker.
Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of questions in the chat about how can I get in research, and I think that there are ladies on the back end, Ms. Thigpen and Ms. Crystal Davis, who should be giving you the proper address and phone call to contact. We have a number of studies. One of the simplest things that you can do, we have something called the Emory Healthy Brain Study. And you can enter that study online, and a select few will get to go for further testing, memory screens, and other things. If you live alone and you're interested in social isolation studies, we have a study that's going on. In coming weeks, you are going to be seeing or hearing about some comparison studies. We're working with Washington University in St. Louis here, and there's one other place. We're going to be looking at PET scanning, a fancy PET scan, and cerebrospinal fluids to see if we can get the same kind of result. And that'll come through some of our consensus. I think, Felicia, you're on that study too. But we have something called an honor or a memory study. There's a number that Cornelia put up there, but please visit our Emory Alzheimer's Disease Research Center website, www.alzheimers.emory.edu, and look at research studies. And there's sure to be something that will be of interest, but Ms. Zimmerman, Ms. Crystal Davis can call you and discuss what you might be eligible for. We do something called a telephone ticks to kind of see what studies, what your abilities are, and kind of funnel you into some studies. Again, www.alzheimers.emory.edu. Look at that website and look under research. There's certainly something that we can get you into.
Okay, and with that, Margot is going to give us one tip to practice this week when it comes to our diet.
Okay, one tip. I think we're gonna continue with the blueberries. I encourage all of you to have a 1/4 cup to a 1/2 cup of blueberries in your diet every single day. And I also wanna let you know, it's never too late to change your diet. It never is. Whether it can start with the next meal, it can be with the next snack. You can always make changes. And they don't have to be Herculean. It can be something very small, because lifestyle changes take time. They do not happen overnight. And we are not at a lack of knowledge or access to knowledge or information. Sometimes it's just changing our behaviors and changing our mindset around making that dietary change. And one last thing that I want to leave, you know, that's not necessarily a dietary tip, but you know, sort of back what we were talking about, you know, different types of dementia. Managing chronic diseases are very important. And I think even Dr. Goldstein talked about high blood pressure, whether it's cardiovascular disease, high cholesterol. Managing those things are also going to help with your brain. And yes, food can affect your brain, and it's not just about the body. Your brain and your body are not independent. They are interconnected. But that's all. And again, thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful 4th of July, and stock up on some blueberries or cherries.
Margot, I'm disappointed. I thought you were going to encourage us to drink red wine.
Oh,
There are a lot of that. There's a lot, maybe homemade red wine.
yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you all. We will see you back here on Tuesday at 2 p.m., July 7th. And for those who might be joining us tomorrow at 2 p.m., have a great rest of the week. Goodbye.
Bye now.